wokeism in our culture. How big of a threat is it to our culture, to Western civilization?
I don't know. I don't know what makes things do this, but it feels like we can never like have a good thing and then have it end as a good thing. Things always get taken to their extreme, and then we have to fight on those extremes. Like I would argue that back in my day, we called it SJW, social justice warriors, before it became woke. I think like 2013 onwards, whatever. Like there are aspects to wokeism that I think are good. Like I like the additional representation that we have in media now. I like how, as much as people complain about the internet and how it's regulated, that there are way more groups that are represented on the internet, whether we're talking X, the platform formerly known as Twitter or Facebook or whatever. I think in some ways, or whether we're pushing, like women's achievements in school and in the wider workforce, I think that these are all good things. The issue that you run into is people don't ever have a stopping point. And I think people kind of get lost in this woke for woke sake thing, where we start to see these very weird warpings of these like academic, I guess, arguments that are used for really horrible things. So, for instance, I think that you can talk about in the United States things like white supremacy or things like oppression of certain demographics, especially with like Jim Crow laws and pre-Jim Crow. And you can even talk about effects from that. But then when you run into this weird world where we've kind of warped these things so that like not only is white supremacy still as present today as it ever has been, well, actually, Black people and other minorities can't even be racist. They don't have the power to because we're going to use a different definition of racism. And we can only talk about punching up as opposed to punching down. And we're actually going to say it's totally okay for these people to say or do whatever they want. And it's never bad. But like white people who have always been the oppressors, even if you're like a trailer park guy whose family's addicted to meth, you have all this privilege, et cetera, et cetera. I think that you run into these issues where wokeism, it starts off as like a really good idea. And I would argue has achieved really good things, especially in regards to like women's education and everything. And then it just gets so academia-ized. So there's a word there, academic, whatever, where you take something and you put it into school too much and then it comes out as some Frankenstein, cancer baby of like horrible things, such that today when I'm reading stuff, and I know Ben is the same way, like if I even hear somebody say the word like anti-racism, I'm probably ignoring every other thing you have to say. If you utter the word like colonial anything, I'm probably going to say you probably don't have anything good to say. Yeah, a lot of it is just taken way too far. But you know what I will blame on some of this is I will blame conservatives for some of this, because I think one issue that happens, and I think Ben might even agree with me here too, is I think there's two huge problems that have happened in the United States, I think broadly speaking, is that one, we become more different than we ever have been, and two, we become more similar than we ever have been. And when I say this, what I mean is that like we're splitting off into these groups, and then these groups are enforcing this insane homogeneity between these two separate groups. And I think one of these schisms has been conservatives' reluctancy to participate in things related to higher education. So for a long time, conservatives are saying like, oh, the educational institutions are against us. Rush Limbaugh talks about how evil the colleges are and blah, blah, blah. And then what happens is conservatives are less and less willing to engage in them. So then you get this scenario or this environment where everybody that's engaged in academia on the administrative side are fucking insane. they're like even more so too. And I also want to draw a distinction between like the administrators and the faculty, because oftentimes when you're reading story after story after story of like all of these insane admins that are pushing further and further left, usually the faculty is fighting against it. A lot of the tenured professors, a lot of people in their departments are saying like, hold on, well, we actually don't agree with this. But I feel like because conservatives for so long have demonized these institutions rather than like critically evaluated them and tried to like have like honest critique and engagement, that they've just like completely broken off. And when you only have a bunch of lefties or righties together, all they'll do is they'll veer off like even more into their insane directions. I feel like that's a big problem that we run into in the country, to where conservatives have totally broken off some conversations, broken away from, where they won't participate in them anymore. And then the people that you have left just run as far to the left as possible.
Certainly when you look at certain institutions.
Okay, before Ben Shapiro respond, Destiny is saying all these things. He forgot to point out that conservatives, they've actually tried to stand up for all these things, but they get shut down. They call them racist, bigots, all those things, all the popes, they label them. So what else do they have to do? It's capitalism. They'll just, bring competition. I think that's why there are many other universities or alternative universities popping up. It's not all about the elite universities coming up right now. Let those woke professors have their elite universities, but people are fed up of being shoved those woke ideas into them. Conservatives have been trying to really, really bring up conversation, but the left, they've just shut everything down. So Destiny should not act like, the left is open. These woke guys, they are open to discussion. No, they are not open to discussion.
One of the things that people on both sides of the aisle are constantly looking at is, has the institution suffered such capture that there is just no capacity to fix it? And when you talk about the universities, I'm not going to blame conservatives for the failure of the universities because they haven't been present in major positions at universities since effectively the late 1960s. And you can go read Shelby Steele's work on this, where he talks about how, he's now a conservative Black person. He was a liberal Black person at the time. He was actually quite a radical Black activist at the time in the 60s. And he talks about walking into the office of liberal administrators who were largely on his side with regard to civil rights and being a radical, him claiming that the systems of the university were inherently broken, were inherently wrong, unfixable. And he talks about this, it's a very evocative episode where he's talking about how he's smoking. And as he's smoking, the ash is growing more and more, and the ash falls down on this very expensive carpet. And the president of the university, who's listening to him rant and rave, Shelby Steele says, I thought he was going to say something about this. I mean, I was wrecking like $1,000 carpet in his office being a jackass. And instead, I could see him wilt inside. I could see him collapse. He didn't have the institutional credibility or the intellect or sort of the spiritual strength to just say, listen, I agree with you on some of these things, but you're acting like a jackass. And what you see in the late 1960s and early 1970s is, in fact, the collapse of these institutions to the point where by the time I was going to college, there was this radical disproportion between conservatives and liberals. And the problem is that when it comes to a system like the universities, basically you have to separate the universities off into two separate categories. One is STEM, where the universities are still pretty damn good. American universities, when it comes to STEM, are still leading universities in the world. Harvard's main creations these days are coming from actual hard science fields. Then you have the liberal arts field, in which you basically have a self-perpetuating elite, because that's actually how dissertations work. If you have somebody who's very far to the left and you decide that you're going to write a dissertation on the history of American gun rights, the chances that that is going to be approved by your dissertation advisor are much lower than if you happen to write something that tends to agree with the political positions of your dissertation advisor. Now, listen, I think there are open and tolerant professors, even in the liberal arts at these universities. I went to these universities, right? I went to UCLA, I went to Harvard Law School. When I was at Harvard Law School, one of my favorite professors was Lani Guinier. Lani Guinier, they tried to appoint her, I believe, Secretary of Labor under Clinton, and she was too liberal, and she got rejected. So she was like a full-on communist. By the time I went there, she was great. We had debates every day. It was wonderful. She used to write me recommendations for my legal jobs after we left. Randall Kennedy, I don't agree with him very much. Randall Kennedy was a terrific professor. There are some professors who are like this. Unfortunately,
if you're enjoying this content, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe. It helps me out a ton. Now let's get back to the video.
There tends to be, in these echo chambers, more and more ideological conformity that is rigorously enforced, and it is by left on left. So, for example, when I was at Harvard Law School, the president of the university was another president who ended up being ousted, Larry Summers. Larry Summers had been the Secretary of Treasury under Bill Clinton, and he made the critical error of suggesting that perhaps the dearth of women in hard sciences in prestigious positions was due to possibly two factors that people were refusing to talk about. One was the possibility that women actually didn't want to be in hard sciences at nearly the rates that men do, which happens to be true. And two was the distribution of STEM IQ, right? Which is something that you certainly were not allowed to talk about. The idea that the men's bell curve when it comes to IQ, particularly on STEM subjects, tends to be shallower than the women's bell curve. So when you get to the very end of the bell curve, what you tend to see is a lot of really dumb guys and a lot of really smart guys. And so when you're talking about the top universities, maybe that has something to do with the disproportion. And he's trying to explain that to say that our systems are not discriminating. If we end up with more men than women, maybe more men are applying and more men are qualified. That's quite. He was ousted for that by a left-wing faculty and general alum network at Harvard University. So there's a lot to blame conservatives for surrendering the playing field. I totally agree that conservatives should not have surrendered the playing field in some institutions. Colleges were surrendered a lot earlier than 20 years ago. They were surrendered in the late 1960s, early 1970s.
Yeah, so I think that a couple things. So one of the big issues that I have with kind of like this, I don't know if we call it era of Trumpism or populism, is this total disregard for institutions and this disconnect from participation in the system.
Yeah, that's because you guys push them away. Why would they trust the institutions? The left used to have this position, but all of a sudden, the way I see it is, as soon as you get power, you become arrogant and you think you're untouchable, right? Because the left were against the institutions, 60s, 70s. I think because largely they were not in power, but increasingly they have become empowered because they're in high positions in the university, the government, and they've become arrogant and complacent, and they're just misusing their power. So it seems the cycle just keeps on going. When you're in power, you abuse your power and you think that you're untouchable. And now it's reversing again. Now it's the right, the conservatives that don't trust institutions, the elite institutions, FBI too, even the Justice Department, because they have been filled with all these woke ideas that have just disregarded about 90% of Americans, their views, because they think they have all the money, they have all the power, they can just dictate to everyone what they think or they feel that they should be. It doesn't work like that.
So it's one of the big things that I fight with progressives about, who cares, because they're all 20 years old, they don't vote anyway. But it's another thing that I notice with a lot of people that are Trump voters, Trump fans, or whatever, is this idea where we say this institution is irrevocably destroyed. It's irredeemable. It can't be saved. Nothing that we do can fix it. And I think that what that leads people to doing is, one, they disconnect further, and then two, there's a general hopelessness when it comes to how society is like ran or structured, such that you fall into that populist brain rot of the only person that can save me is Donald Trump. I can't trust literally anything. And I think that when you start driving people into that direction, all it does is it further amplifies all of the problems that you're complaining about. So that's one of the reasons why when we talk about like conservative participation, I want there to be more conservatives that are trying to participate in academia. But I feel like the leading thought or the leading speaking out against it is basically saying it's a waste of time. It's completely lost.
So I think that the alternative to that is that you're seeing on the right a growth of, for example, alternative universities. Saying,
yeah,
you
but
won't
this
let
is
us
the
in.
worst thing.
No, I don't think so at all. I think competition is a great way of incentivizing some change on behalf of universities that may have forgotten that there's an entire other side of the aisle in the United States.
No shot. I don't think even you think that.
So first of all, let me make it clear.
Go.
I think the entire educational system at the upper levels, if you're not in STEM, is a complete scam. I think it's a complete waste of money. I think it's a complete waste of time. And I think that it's all it is a formalized, very expensive sorting mechanism for people of IQ. That's all it is. People take an SAT, you go to a good school, you take 4 years of bullshit. I know, I did it at UCLA. And then we analyze based on your degree where you should go to law school. I could have gone directly from high school to law school with maybe 1 year of training and then done 1 year of law school and been done. Okay, the reality is that this is a giant scam. And this, again, it's a bipartisan problem, but it's just a generalized problem.
Yeah, I think it's only in America where, I mean, people go to school and come out having lots of debt. I mean, even if you didn't go to school, like, how could you rack up hundreds of thousands of debt that you never pay until you're maybe, so for some people, until they retire? The last time I heard, they said Obama was still paying his student debt, even though he's got millions. Anyway, I think he's just pretending to just let the masses know that, oh, I still pay my student debt, but it's part of a system. But this thing is a giant scam. They just, you remember that America runs on debt, right? They dish the gold standard. So if people don't borrow money, the economy collapse, the dollar collapse. So they have to make sure that everyone is having debt for them to create money, something like that. So I don't think the cycle will be over soon. And it is technically bipartisan because they understand that they are running on debt. If that ends, America collapses. So I don't know, they have to figure out a way to get out of this, because it's really, really modern slavery to get everyone in debt before they even start working and earning money. Can you imagine? Your first pay slip, you're already paying debts. You cannot even have that leisure of, it's my first pay slip, I have to just munch everything and start all over again. It's unbelievable. It's a giant scam. These alternative universities that Ben Shapiro is talking about, I think it's a good thing that they should create them and just bring up the competition and let the best win. Conservative ideas, woke ideas, but for now, this election just proved the woke idea is dead and gone. It's not coming back. Forget about it. So this debate technically is technically irrelevant as of now. The American public has spoken.
Talk about things that hurt the lower classes in the United States. The bleeding of degrees up is so wild and crazy. There's so many jobs in the United States that should not require a college degree that we now require a college degree to do, because there was this weird idea that came over Americans where they mistook correlation for causation. They would say, oh, look, people who go to college are making more money than people who don't go to college. Therefore, everyone should go to college. Well, maybe the reason is because people who are going to college were better qualified for particular jobs because on average, not all the time, but on average, a lot of those people were smarter and making more money because of that.
Yep.
And so all you've done is you've now created these additional layers of stratification. So a person who used to be able to get a job with a college degree now has to have a postdoc degree in order to go get that degree. A person who used to be able to just graduate high school, now it's de facto, you got to go to JUCO and then you got to go to college, or nobody's even going to look at your resume. It's really, really terrible for people who can't afford all of that. It's led to this massive increase in educational cost that is inexplicable, other than this particular sort of bleed up, and by the way, federal subsidies for higher education. Again, one of my problems with federal subsidies for higher education, I'd love for everyone to be able to go to college if qualified to do so and if it is productive. But one of the things I did when I went to law school is I took loans because a bank said I was going to get my money back if I got a law degree from Harvard. But you know when you're not going to get your money back? If you're a bank, you're not going to lend to some dude who wants to major in, art theory, because is that a good bet? There's no collateral, right? If I give a loan for a house, I can go repossess the house. How do I repossess your garbage college degree from UCLA? There's no way to do that. So, this is the broader conversation about education in general. I think the educational system is cruising for a bruising. And I think all that's necessary for it to completely collapse on the non-STEM side where you actually learn things is for people who employ to simply say, give me your SAT score and I will hire you for an apprenticeship directly out of high school. That it would cut out so much of the middleman. But as far as the general point that you're making about institutions, I may disagree on the education and how far it's gone. In general, I agree with you. So it's in general, I agree. And I get to use my favorite longest word in the English language here. I would consider myself in many cases an anti-disestablishmentarianist.
Nice.
Right? You see, I like to drop that. That's it, because if you're an establishmentarian, that means you like
In
the
opposition to the
disestablishmentarianism. Right. So I'm an anti. So
Can you say that word, Dustin?
That's the one we all learned growing up. Anti-disestablishmentarianism is
there
the
you
longest
go.
word in the
So-
dictionary.
and so
We've
he is
all-
also.
yeah.
So, but I
And then
think
some Canadian group would say, "What about supercalifragilistic?" And then you're
What about pneumo ultramicroscopic?
or the science terms.
Yeah, exactly.
Or what about the 7,000 letter thing that's from part of biochemistry?
I got my education in the Soviet Union, so we just did math. We didn't learn any of this.
That's why you're a useful person.
Soviet Union math was at 1 + 1, how to make that equal 3?
We know long words, and he streams on the internet, and I talk for a living. So anyway,
yeah.
the point is that I don't disagree that there is a general populist tendency on all sides of the aisle to look at the institutions and then throw them overboard. I think that some of that is earned by people who are in positions of power at institutions who have completely undermined the faith and credibility of those institutions. I think that you have to examine institution by institutions which ones are salvageable and which ones are not. So I'm not a full anti-disestablishmentarianism. I'd be partially in that camp. There are certain institutions like higher education in the liberal arts that I think we may be better off without. And then there are certain institutions like, say, participation in American government, where when people talk about we need a revolution, I'm like, no, we don't. That's not a thing. We need an evolution. We need change. We can use the system. And but I think you have to look at it industry,
Just curious.
institution by institution.
On that position on institutions, do you think Biden or Trump would side with you more?
As far as the institutions,
Yeah.
I think the institutions in the United States at the governmental level are robust. I think the social institutions are failing.
Yeah, but I'm just curious on your general view of institutions. Do you think Biden or Trump would side with you more on how you view them?
I think that in rhetoric, Biden would, and then I think that he would tear out the face of the institution and wear it around like a mask, like Hannibal Lecter. I mean, that's
Even
my
though he
actual.
resisted some people's calls to pack the court and
Yes, because I think that his use of executive power was greater than that of Donald Trump. The power that he had, he used to greater effect than Donald Trump. Donald Trump, again, thrashed up against the sides of the box, but could not get out of it.
It's so refreshing that Ben Shapiro is agreeing with Destiny on some points, right? This is what the woke left cannot really do. They are just hard on their own point of view without even allowing for discourse. But in general, what I'm trying to take out of this is just, to me, Ben Shapiro just schooled Destiny and just taught him how to behave like a common sense human being. You can agree, you can disagree, but you should not go nuclear on the other side just because they've got another idea. I bet you there's never been a point where Destiny or most of the woke left have agreed with their conservative or right or even the far right conservatives, their opponents, I'll call them, even though they call them enemies. It's not really enemies or political enemies, so it's not that not bad. Or let's not push the rhetoric to those extremes. But anyway, I don't want to say too much, but I just think that Ben is teaching lots of these woke leftists that you can have discussions, and sometimes the right may agree with you, but the woke left has never even acknowledged even their own position that the right agrees with them. Acknowledge as soon as the right agrees with them, they just take the opposite direction. That's the most frustrating thing about this whole thing. But things cannot continue like that. Let's hope these 4 years really bring some sense into the woke left's mind. This is Black Coffee. Thanks for tuning in. See you in the next one. Cheers.